Hello, welcome back. We're going to jump into chapter 11. We learned some more about Mr. H and who he was, kind of what some of his past was. So as I read, think about what we learn about him and why is it important? Why is it important for Mr. H to share about who he was, and why was it important for Sean to know about this? I fell asleep very quickly, but I woke up at 4 in the morning and couldn't go back to sleep. I tossed and turned for almost 45 minutes before I decided to stop fighting it and get up and just get dressed. I sat at the desk and worked on my paper for about an hour. I quit when I glanced out the window and saw the sky turning purple and pink. I crept down the stairs without making a sound and grabbed the jacket on my way out. Even though it hadn't taken me long to get down the stairs and outside, the sky was already turning gold. The long grass that hugged the path to the stable was bending under the weight of the dew. Before long, it would be frost instead. Nicker was up when I got to his stall. He seemed excited to see me, even though his eyes were not completely opened. Then he yawned. It was the funniest thing I had ever seen. I don't know why, but I guess I never thought that a horse would yawn. I put the halter on him, and he followed me out into the paddock. I'd like to think he followed me because he liked me, but I think it was probably to do more with the fact that he wanted the bottle I was carrying. Head down, tail up, then tail down. He yanked and pulled on the bottle, first shoving his head into me, then backing off a few steps. When the bottle was empty, he stood next to me, leaning against my side, blinking his eyes. He looked more than just satisfied. He looked happy, content. We were both learning how to enjoy that feeling at the ranch. Nicker and I watched the sunrise together. Well, I watched it. He sort of dozed for a few minutes, and then he ran around the paddock a bit. He kicked up his back heels and then ran as fast as he could, stopping abruptly to sniff a clump of thistles. Then he'd be off again, racing his shadow and jumping out of his skin when a rabbit popped up out in front of him. I enjoyed having the time alone, time I could use to think. I felt like I had been transplanted into a fairy tale world. I mean, here I was, at a great ranch, working with a guy who actually cared about me. Not because he had to, not because he would get anything from it, but for some other reason. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why Mr. H wanted to help me. I was just glad that he did. I felt embarrassed about last night, but I didn't know what I could do about it, and although I had acted pretty awful, at least I had found out that even though Mr. H got lots of kids during the year, he didn't consider us a bunch of faces. He really cared. I wanted to believe the fairy tale would last forever, but I knew better. Happy endings are only found in Hollywood, but that didn't mean my ending had to be bad. I probably wouldn't be able to stay with Mr. H like I wanted to, but I could do something other than just go back home. I could do something. I just didn't quite know what. Maybe my dad and I could work something out. We stayed there for 20 minutes before I figured it was probably time to head back up to the house. When I called Nicker to me and started to lead him back to his stalls, I realized there was nothing wrong with leaving him where he could stretch his legs and get a little exercise for the morning. I left him, nickering at me, over the paddock fence. I didn't see James's truck when I got to the house, so I slipped inside as quietly as I could. I didn't know what time it was or what time Mr. H got up, and I didn't want to be the one to wake him up. Then I heard a noise. I almost said good morning before I realized he was on the phone. He was talking quietly, probably trying not to wake me up. Yeah, Frank, I'm sorry I woke you up so early on a Saturday morning, but I need to talk to you about the kid. Yeah, Sean Parker. No, he's doing fine work, and I really appreciate your help in helping me get him around the school's in-house policy. This is a new problem. Well, his mother was admitted to the hospital last night. No. Well, look, I've got to make this quick, so how about you get to the rest of the story by coming over this afternoon? Yeah, it's pretty important. Well, I think his father's planning a lawsuit. I kind of hit him last night. No, not Sean. I hit his father. Yeah, me and my temper. But Frank, he was standing there calmly telling me that I shouldn't spend extra time on worthless cases like his son. I couldn't believe it either. And I've got this feeling Sean's mother isn't exactly. Mr. Hassler broke off abruptly as he turned around and saw me standing in front of him. Frank, can you come over this afternoon? I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, I've got to go now. 12 o'clock then. All right, bye. He hung up the phone slowly, never taking his eyes off me. I dropped the jacket over the back of the couch. What should I start for breakfast? I asked, heading to the kitchen. Sean. He reached out and stopped me by putting his hand on my shoulder. How much of that conversation did you hear? Probably all of it. I'm sorry, Sean. I really didn't want you to hear any of it. I shrugged. It's no big deal, I said, continuing to the kitchen. What? Don't look so surprised. You don't really think that's the first time I've heard that, do you? He followed me into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He looked like he was at a complete loss. Of course, I said, rummaging through the fridge for the milk and orange juice. I haven't heard it from him. I haven't heard anything from him for years. Now I guess I know why. I poured 2 glasses of orange juice and set them on the table. Mr. Hassler still didn't say anything. I dug the pancake mix out of the cupboard and went back to the fridge for the eggs. Sean? I looked at him. Come here. Sit down, please. Let me get breakfast. Breakfast can wait. Please sit down, Sean. I sat down. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't want you to hear what your father said because I was afraid that you might believe it. Now that you say that you've heard it a lot, do you believe what you hear? Everyone else does. I'm asking if you believe. It doesn't matter when I think, when everyone else has already made up their minds. Yes, it does matter what you believe. No, it doesn't. Even when I believe I can do something, it doesn't matter. Okay, I believe I'm smart and I can do well in school, so I study for my test, and then I'm accused of cheating because I got an A. I like the research assignment, so I spend 4 hours writing the paper, and then I get asked who wrote it for me. I go out for sports and I get cut because things have been stolen from the locker room, and I'm the only non-preppy, non-jock on the team, so I must have been the one doing it. It doesn't matter what I believe, not when everyone else has already decided for me. He put his head in his hands. Wow, you really are me all over again, he muttered. What? Sean, I grew up during the Depression. Things were bad for everyone, but they were really bad for my family. We had a history of being drunks, cheaters, thieves, and lazy bums who would never amount to anything. My grandfather was that way, my father was that way, and so are both of my older brothers. I decided I didn't want to be that way. He took a deep breath. I lived in a town of 400 people. I spent my whole life trying to prove myself better than my family. In a town that small, it's not an easy task. I thought about that. My junior high had over 600 students, and there were 6 junior highs in our district. To live where an entire town had only 400 people, that's a small town, I said. I bet everyone knew what kind of person you were going to be. They thought they knew, he corrected, and I was out to prove them wrong. That sounds impossible. It felt impossible, he agreed. So many times I thought I could not do it. So many times I decided that maybe I should just quit and be what they wanted me to be. It would be easier that way. He shook his head. The small smile on his lips didn't reach his eyes, but then one day a set of diamond cufflinks were stolen. They belonged to the mayor. There were 6 of us in the town who had been working in his office, cleaning. We were rounded up. They started grilling me right away, and I held my ground. They couldn't get any information out of us anyway, so we were all released. But small towns have their own way of doing unofficial trials, and I had already been tried and convicted. For the rest of the week, I could feel the town's hatred every time I walked down the street. I knew exactly how that felt. So anyway, a week later, they caught a kid trying to pawn the cufflinks in the next town. It turned out to be the mayor's own son. Kidding. I'm serious. The next day I was confused when the mayor called me and asked me to drop by his house. I went there on my way to work. He apologized. He said that he had read me wrong and that he had been doing it for a long time. Then he pulled $20 out and tried to hand it to me. Tried to? I leaned forward in my chair. You didn't take it? No, for two reasons. First, if I suddenly had money, people would question where it came from. Like, did I steal it this time? Second, I did not want him thinking that I could be bought. What do you mean, bought? I didn't want him to think that just by giving me money, he could make everything better. I wasn't looking for money. I wanted to be, he broke off, searching for the word. You wanted to be respected, understood, accepted? Yeah, he said, nodding with a smile. All of those. What did he say when you didn't take the money? He asked me what I wanted to do with my life since I was obviously struggling to stay on the straight and narrow path. He said that I was still on it. He said that I was still on it. He knew that, but he also knew I was struggling. I told him all that I was trying to do was hang on for another 2 years until I was 18, and then I was going to enlist. Mr. H stopped for a drink of orange juice. He asked me if I really wanted to enlist. I said, of course, because that was the only way I was going to get out of the town and have a chance to get somewhere in my life. Then he asked if I would go if I had the chance now. But you were only 16. You didn't have that choice. Well, that's what I thought. But he said he could pull some strings and get me in right away. When I went home that night, I told my family that I was going to leave the next week to get a better job. My father laughed at me. It was an angry, scary laugh. He told me he was sick of me trying to act like I was better than the rest of them. We had a huge fight, and I slept in the back shed for the rest of the week. He sighed and smiled. I left town that Monday, and I've never looked back. I started laughing. So you were illegal in the Army? Technically, yes. But the point is, Sean, that if you believe in yourself, it doesn't matter what others think. So what, you want me to go enlist? You've got an advantage. It's easier these days in a town this size to move where people don't know you. Now it's easier to find a career with ways to advance that are outside the military. You can do it, Sean, if you believe in yourself and if you decide that that's what you want to do. I sat quietly for a few minutes. I must not have looked convicted because he leaned forward and said softly, I lied. I did look back once. I only went back because my mother had passed away and I wanted to pay my respects. Then I went to town to see my father. He was still living in the same run-down house, only by that time it was more like a shack. I stayed there for 15 minutes. Mr. Hassler's voice dropped a notch and he looked down at his feet. The whole time I was there, my father tried to belittle me. He tried to make me feel worthless again. Understand at this time I had been gone for 15 years. I was married, was holding a steady job. I left a $50 bill on the kitchen table for my father as I walked out, and on my way out of town I suddenly realized something. He looked up at me. People had been putting me down all my life because they could tell that I could be something if I wanted to be. They did not want me to succeed. That's why they made my life so terrible. If I could succeed where they didn't, then they were weaker than I was, so they tried to stop me. Sean, a lot of people can tell you that you can succeed. Some of them will even try and stop you now, even from trying. Don't let them stop you. Come back in 20 years and be able to buy your father's company. Don't sink into what they think you are. I dropped my eyes to look at the floor. I didn't want Mr. Hassler to know how good that idea felt. I could do it. I could prove Mr. H right and my mother and my father wrong all at the same time. The kitchen door slammed and I jumped. Hey, where's breakfast? Here I am, running late and obviously starving, and there's no breakfast? James sat down at the table as I got up. He looked at us. What's going on? Nothing, I said quickly. It was a late night, Mr. H explained. We got a phone call about 9 telling us Sean's mother was in the hospital. Ooh, geez. Sorry to hear that, Sean, he said as I handed him some orange juice. Thanks. She gonna be okay? I shrugged. We don't really know, Mr. H said. She was in critical condition, but they think she'll recover. Her kidneys failed. Oh. I stared at the pancakes. Well, I thought and I could exercise 10 of the riding ponies today and then get the other 10 tomorrow, Mr. H said briskly, and we'll have Sean start the cornfield this morning. I nodded. Then this afternoon, Sean, I want you to work with Nicker some more with the halter and start grooming him. James will show you which soft brush to use. This time I didn't even try and hold back a grin. Things were going to be okay. I could find the right track here. Mr. H would help me stay there. It's the end of chapter 11. So take just a couple of minutes and in Canvas answer what do we learn about who Mr. H was and why is that important for Sean to understand?